Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. On tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about who to root for when you can't really root for anyone, but you have to bandwagon an NHL playoff team. We're going to go through the Eastern and Western conferences and find which plucky underdogs might be worth rooting for since the Jets are probably not going to make the playoffs, all coming up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Jets. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. I am your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, if you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, and as you can see, YouTube. We're going to be doing both audio and visual podcasts going forward, so if you haven't yet heard the news, we've moved to YouTube permanently, and you'll get the same daily content, the same episodes. It's just one has video and one is just audio to take with you on the go. So wherever you want us, we're available for you there. Now, on tonight's episode, I thought it would be fun to talk about who to root for in the NHL playoffs because, let's be real, the Jets aren't going to make it. The Florida trip from hell basically sealed that fate, which I think a lot of us are probably more relieved. The team itself seems like it frankly needs a break. There's been reports of locker room friction. Even the Jets' faithful media has kind of turned against the team a bit and is seemingly more vocal about the issues than it's been previously. So if even the local media have taken notice of stuff, you could probably tell that there's some change coming in the wins for the Jets. Now, all that said, it's still a couple of months away, and in between then, we've got the playoffs, which is going to be a pretty crazy time, I think, for the NHL. This year, the matchups are a little bit difficult to predict with so many quality, high-end contenders and a bit of a jumbled middle field, I would say. So let's take a look at the Eastern Conference. A couple of teams have already punched their tickets to the playoffs. You've got Carolina, the Rangers, and Pittsburgh in the Metro, and then on the Atlantic side, Florida, Toronto, and Tampa Bay. And then your wild cards are Boston and Washington. Now, out of the Metro top three, this is a field that I don't really love to root for a variety of reasons. Whenever I root for a Metro Division team, it's always the Caps. They're my local squad. The Canes, you could say, make a favorable case in the sense of Carolina being a very process-oriented team, right? So this is a squad that's been built from the ground up to have elite scoring, great offensive creation, a strong defense, and it's run by very smart people. So this is not a team that makes a lot of really silly decisions. And they're one of the most dominant squads out there. They've had a monster season. And were it not for teams like the Florida Panthers, Carolina would probably have stolen the show. But we know that, the past couple of years, they've had really strong regular seasons. And then in the postseason, it's kind of flamed out. Now, the reason that I'm not really electing to bandwagon the Canes this year, they're just not that likable of a team, to be honest. I like some of their players, but some of their recent decisions and stuff, and some of the pandering that they did that they've kind of since backtracked on, I feel like I didn't really appreciate the mixed messaging. If you're going to support social causes, you need to follow that with your actions and not just words. And I think some of their moves, they were definitely questionable to me. Some of the players that they've brought in weren't really the kind of guys I'd be into. So, yeah, the Canes for me, I would probably give them a pass. But if you can overlook some of their annoyances, they're probably one of the safer bets to have a really strong playoff run. I think rooting against the Panthers at this point, probably a losing bet. Now, the Rangers are a more interesting team. I think this is the squad that most resembles the Jets of the past few years. This is a team that also has a lot of former Winnipeg players, Jacob Trouba, Andrew Kopp who's been killing it recently. So if you want basically bizarro Jets, which is not as consistently productive, even strength offense, but a great power play, amazing goaltending, and elite finishing talent, this is your team. There are some notable differences between this squad and the Jets over the past few years, but I think the Rangers, they're the closest thing to like a Jets stand-in that we're going to have. And both the Rangers and the Jets seem to actually get along pretty well based on the amount of business dealings that they have done together. So if you want to root for this team, I really don't think it's that dangerous of a choice. I think it's pretty safe. And I actually kind of like the Rangers. There's a couple of players that I'm very much a fan of, Adam Fox and, Mika Zibanejad, plus the ex-Jets. I think that's okay. Now, Pittsburgh. I as a Baltimorean, I cannot tell you to root for the Penguins. But if you have to, if you feel like this is your civic duty to pick a team from the Metro and you hate both New York and Carolina, the Pens are fine. Pittsburgh is one of those dark horse teams that is secretly very good, but maybe has a couple of cosmetic flaws that might be enough to upset the cart. They've had some consistency issues. From what I understand, the special teams haven't been amazing. And their last 10 games or so, the form's kind of been a little bit up and down. So I don't know what this team's greatest strengths are. I think the goaltending and defense have had a up and down season. The offense is still as productive as ever, though. So if they can lean heavily on that, I don't think that they're going to have too many issues. But the Penguins, they're getting older. They don't have as many runs left in the tank. I think they're trying to cobble together as many playoff core groups together out of guys that they've traded for, or they've tried to pick up on the cheap as much as possible to keep Crosby and Malkin going for as long as possible. But eventually, I'm sure the genie lamp's going to run out, and they've already burned through more than 3 wishes. So this team, I mean, as a Baltimorean, I can't say that they're an inoffensive choice, but if you're looking for one that's relatively tame on the sensibilities, I guess you can root for the Pens. They're a little bit generic to me at times, but they're still a pretty good team. And of course, there are other choices. We'll talk about some of the wild card teams as well as the Atlantic in just a little bit. But before we go any further, I do want to tell you about one thing that I think would actually be really relevant for this playoff run. If you've ever done online betting, you know that especially during playoff time, this is the most exciting time of the year for most sports. And you need a safe, trusted, reliable name. A lot of you probably don't have, more than a couple of sites that you use. But if you really want one number one source, I highly recommend BetOnline. They've got all the betting stats and sports info you could possibly want. You'll find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, news, trade rumors, basketball playoff brackets, MLB news. I mean, whatever sport you're into, they've got it. IndyCar, Bundesliga football. I've placed a bet on Eintracht Frankfurt before. Even Borussia Dortmund bets. Maybe some of you are Bayern fans because you love Alphonso Davies. They're going to have World Cup odds. Whatever you're looking for, BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information from live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Getting started really couldn't be easier. Just go to betonline.net on your laptop or mobile device to get started and check out all of the latest trends and news that you can get in on. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Before we continue our teams that you might consider rooting for, especially if you're looking for a bandwagon squad with the Jets likely missing the playoffs, I just wanted to shout out one of our other really cool podcasts. It's called Locked On Now, and it takes all of the hottest, latest action from around the NHL and condenses it into very short, bite-sized pieces, so you'll always stay up to date on the latest action, but on a time scale that works for you. We have, experts from all across the network, from all different sports, college sports, whether it's basketball, football. Of course, you've got us, Locked On hockey stuff from the Locked On NHL branch. Whatever it is, Locked On Now is there for you every day. And, it's free to subscribe. So check them out on YouTube, on your favorite podcasting platforms. Same places, Locked On Jets is available. Give them a follow and a subscription right now. Now, for teams that, you might be considering rooting for out of the East, on the Atlantic side, there are a couple of squads here. And this is probably one of my least favorite rooting fields. You've got the Panthers, who are, of course, the likely Stanley Cup favorites. I just don't really see a team that's capable of stopping them. They have one of the most insane goal differentials I've ever seen, one of the most prolific offenses I've ever seen. They're extremely well balanced from the ground up. They've got an amazing offense, a really strong defense, excellent goaltending. This team, they've won 10 straight games. I just obviously the playoffs are subject to a lot of randomness, and if a goaltending streak suddenly ends, this is one of those things that you can't really do anything about. But I have a hard time envisioning this Panthers team struggling. I don't see it. The only reason I'm not really super in love with them is that they had the whole situation with Joel Quenneville earlier this year that I haven't forgotten. I feel like they should have, removed him from his office as soon as the Kyle Beach stuff came out, but the team continued to have him behind the bench until they were forced to have him removed. So, yeah, that definitely left a sour taste in the mouth, and it's one of the reasons that, like, for as good as this team is, something about them I don't love. Now, the second team is Toronto, and there's no reason that anyone here is going to be rooting for the Leafs unless you just get really desperate, or people who are Leafs fans. Obviously I'm never going to root for them no matter what. I kind of wanted the Habs to go far last year, but when it comes to Toronto, I just if they end up advancing and going deep into the playoffs, we're just never going to hear the end of it. So rather than jumping on that ship and dealing with the very fun fan base that is a very large portion of the Leafs fans. Not all of them, mind you. There are plenty of wonderful fans in that group, but certainly there's a rather obnoxious portion that's not unlike the more obnoxious parts of the Jets fan base. So, yeah, we're going to skip them. Don't root for them unless you're, really selling out. The third team that you could potentially root for, I guess, is like the big bad. They're Tampa Bay. They've been here multiple times. They've won multiple cups. If you're looking for a perennial contender and winner, maybe you just don't like uncertainty. Tampa Bay is a pretty safe bet. They're one of the strongest squads out there. A little bit of a decline recently over the past couple of seasons, but again, hasn't really affected them too much because they keep winning. They are one of the most consistent squads, I would say, even with their game-to-game inconsistencies. Prolific offense, very strong goaltending, pretty nice defense. Again, I mean, there's not really much that you can poke a hole with other than, maybe fatigue might be starting to catch up to them. Out of the wild card spots, you've also got Washington and Boston. Now, the Bruins are definitely a team that I think a lot of people are kind of annoyed by at times because they're seen as dirty. You've got Marchand, who always runs his mouth. And this team is definitely on the older side. The Bruins, I don't really know if I have any particular thoughts on them other than they are a team that's decent and veteran. They've got some wonderful players in Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand, Charlie McAvoy, who continues to be one of the league's best defenders without really getting all that much recognition. The only thing with them is, again, they are getting older, and so I think the returns and yields that we used to see from them have definitely declined. This team is not as good at scoring as it used to be, but still a nasty opponent and probably not one that you would want to face in the first round. The Caps, they're a strange team. This year, I know that they're good on paper and they appear good in a lot of areas, but goaltending for them remains an Achilles heel. They just don't get many saves, and I think that's one of the most frustrating things for this team. I would also say that the whole Ovechkin situation around the Russia invasion of Ukraine, I think that has left a sour taste in a lot of mouths. Obviously with pro sports, you have all sorts of compromises socially that you probably have to make. But this particular situation and the way that Ovechkin and the Caps handled it, I think it makes it hard to root for this team. Obviously in the past, we all know that he was a Putin supporter. That's not a shocker. That's a very well-established fact. But in the face of all the information and stuff that we've seen, it's just, even as somebody who lives around here, I'm like, yeah, if the Caps don't make it or struggle in the first couple of rounds, I'm not going to be that upset. I haven't really been following his chase for the Gretzky record as much this season. So, yeah, I'm trying to find really good teams to root for and really good guys. This year, the field's a little controversial, so it's hard to get super hyped about it. I think it's especially noticeable on the eastern side with some of the compromises you'd probably have to make to really put aside your differences and bandwagon these teams. I think the safest team to probably bandwagon for me is probably Pittsburgh, with the Rangers kind of being a close second since there's a lot of former Jets. But I feel like if you're going to choose a team, maybe go for somebody on the Western Conference. I think The West, we got to stand with our Central and Pacific Division friends, and we'll talk about which teams might be worth considering in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out the wonderful folks at rockauto.com. If you have ever used rockauto.com, you are very much aware that they have an amazing selection of auto parts. These days, there are so many makes and models, and when you have local parts stores near you, most of them can't keep what you need in stock. Even if they can order it, you'd just be going to the retail store, standing in line and waiting for a clerk to serve you, placing an online order you could do if you just went online at home and did it yourself. So what's the point? Well, rockauto.com is here to save time and money. You can save anywhere from 30, 50, even 100% off retail brick and mortar in-store pricing, which is pretty darn amazing. They've got a Honda Odyssey fuel pump that would normally be $353 in store, but rockauto.com has them for $216. Crazy discount. But for all of the money that you might save and the time that you might save, I think you should also really consider the fact that they're just a great bunch of folks. This is a family-run business serving DIYers for over 20 years. They've got great customer service. My family's actually used them before. Even before I knew about the sponsor ad on this, they had shopped at rockauto.com, and we have nothing but positive things to say about them. They're super fun, super nice people, and I really think you should give them a shot. So to get started, go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts that they have available for your car or truck. Be sure to write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Hello, friends, and welcome to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are trying to find some teams to root for in the NHL, especially bandwagon squads, because it is almost the playoffs. And, the Jets aren't going to make it. So we need to pick some bandwagon teams to root for, which a lot of them are not quite as likable as I would like them to be. But, there are some underdogs and stuff that maybe you could root for. On the Western side of things, there's a lot more underdogs than usual. But this first team, Colorado in the Central, not an underdog, another Cup favorite, a team that's very similar to the Panthers, a championship caliber squad, probably the second best team in the league, right there, lockstep with the Panthers. Again, pretty strong goaltending, strong defensive structures, relatively speaking. So long as you don't pressure them continually inside the defensive zone. If they have to spend a lot of time defending, they usually have issues with that. But because they create so much offense the other way, usually not that much of an issue for them. But I mean, they're just blowing their opponents out of the water. So a really fantastic team. One of the most exciting young squads out there, and I think a squad that the Jets should honestly, model themselves after long term. But that's probably never happening. So let's not get our expectations too high. Another team that you could choose is the Blues. Just don't. I don't like the Blues. No one likes the Blues. The Jets have a pretty strong rivalry with St. Louis. And honestly, I just feel like there's more interesting teams to root for than a team that's already won the Cup. It's just, I don't know, they're just not that exciting to watch to me. The game against the Wild, though, recently that they had was very thrilling. They have quietly amassed a pretty good record this year and really seem to be under the radar in terms of like really big playoff contenders. So I'm curious to know how good they really are and what they will do in the postseason. But, one of their earlier opponents might be the Minnesota Wild. And honestly, if I had to choose a team to bandwagon, this would probably be one of my top three choices. The Wild, I feel like because they're, right over the border, they've got a good rivalry with the Jets, a lot of history with this franchise. They play a style of hockey that's probably closer to what the Jets were a few years ago. I don't know if I would call them likable, but I like a lot of their players, and I think, reasonably speaking, there's something in their identity and the way that they play and how they approach the game that is close enough to how the Jets would probably be, that I think that it makes them a reasonable choice if you want to bandwagon somebody. Now, out of the Pacific, you've got Calgary, Edmonton, and the Kings. Just skip Edmonton and the Kings for, obvious reasons. The Kings are one of those squads that I think is just, they're not super fun to watch, even though they are a pretty decent team. But, it's LA. Yeah, they've already won a cup in the past decade. So, who needs to really worry about them? A decade and a half, I should say, a couple of cups. But Edmonton, it's McDavid's team. we all want to just laugh at Edmonton, so don't root for them either. Same thing with like the Leafs that I said, another team that if they ever advance, we'll just never hear the end of it. Now, Calgary. Calgary, I think, presents a decent option if you want a more under the radar cup contending pick. This team, man, under Daryl Sutter has locked things down. They are replicating what the Kings did many years ago. Great defensive structure. A really surprisingly underappreciated offense that's generally scoring quite a few goals. And excellent goaltending with Markstrom in net. So a really well-balanced team, a squad that I think not enough people have paid attention to this year. And I'm very curious to know how they match up if they were to play a team like Colorado in the postseason. The wild cards, though, after that, they haven't actually settled. So for now, we're not going to talk about those teams. It's currently just Nashville, Dallas, Vegas, and Vancouver all fighting for the last two spots. If you feel any particular way about any of those teams, you can choose to root for them. I don't really care about any of them, to be honest. I would be totally fine if they all missed, to be honest, but that's obviously not going to happen. So I think this year, Calgary, Minnesota, and the Rangers, plus maybe the Penguins, those would be my choices if you have to choose one. Maybe Colorado if you want a team that's going to be a monster. But yeah, I'd be curious to know who you would want to root for. Be sure to let me know at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. Maybe I'll talk about your wonderful choices for who to bandwagon on a future episode. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. It's free and available wherever you get your favorite podcasts, so be sure to like, follow, and subscribe right now. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.